Hola a todos, soy Señor Quesada, and today we are going to learn about regular verb conjugation in the present tense. First of all, these are going to be your notes. So on a piece of paper, take notes on the topics explained. Make sure you conjugate all the practice verbs on this set of notes. Highlight or underline important questions and ideas. And finally, once you're done, take pictures of your notes and upload those pictures to Google Classroom so you can get credit for this assignment. Let's begin. First, let's talk about types of verbs or different kinds of verbs we have in Spanish. In Spanish, we have different types of verbs. For example, we have regular verbs. Those are verbs that follow a conjugation pattern. We have irregular verbs. Those are verbs that do not follow a given conjugation pattern. We have stem changing verbs. Those are verbs that change their stems when conjugated. But today, we are only learning about regular verbs in the present tense. So all of the verbs that I'm going to give you follow the conjugation patterns that I'm going to show you today. Let's talk about verb forms before we talk about conjugations. In Spanish, verbs have a basic form called the infinitivo or the infinitive. This is the verb form you would find in a dictionary if you would look for it. El infinitivo or the infinitive has three endings in Spanish. The first ending is AR verbs, such as in the verbs caminar, bailar, or saltar. These are known as AR verbs. The second ending is ER, such as comer, beber, or leer. These verbs are known as ER verbs. And finally, IR. Escribir, vivir, and abrir are examples of IR verbs. Let's talk about the parts of the verbs. In Spanish, all verbs are made up by two different parts. The first one is called the stem, and the stem is the verb's root or the base. The second part is called the ending, and the ending is pretty much the ending of the verb. That's it. Now, like we said on the previous slide, we have three endings in infinitive form: AR, ER, and IR. Let's look at those once again. The verb caminar, comer, and escribir. As you can see in these verbs, we have changed the endings, or we have changed the color of the ending so you can clearly see it. And we have changed the color of the stems and underline those stems as well so you can clearly see it. So there, you can see the stems, and here you can see the endings of those verbs. Once again, all regular verbs follow this pattern. Now, let's talk about regular AR verb conjugations. When we conjugate regular verbs, the stem never changes. Remember, that's the first part of the verb. The only parts that change are the endings, and those endings change based on who is the person doing the action. For example, let's look at the conjugations of the verb caminar. Like I said, the verb caminar has a stem and an ending. The stem is not going to change at all. If we look at these conjugations, you can clearly see that the stem of the verb stayed the same in all those conjugations. Now, why do I have X's in the word vosotros or the conjugation of vosotros? That's because we're really not going to use the conjugation of vosotros in this class, so we don't have to worry about this. Once again, the only thing that changes is the ending. So for the yo form, if you want to say you are doing something, all you do is keep the stem and add the letter O. Yo camino. I walk to school, for example. Yo camino a la escuela. The ending for the to form is AS. Tú caminas. The ending for usted, él, and ella is the same. Usted camina, él camina. All we need to do is add an A to the stem. Nosotros caminamos. We use add amos, A-M-O-S, to the stem. And finally, ustedes and ellos share the same conjugation. Ustedes caminan, ellos caminan. So on the next slide, we want to practice. So make sure you underline all your stems and follow these endings as you complete the conjugation on the next slide. All you need to do is keep the endings, actually keep the stems, and add those endings to your conjugations. One more thing. As you are conjugating, make sure you begin your conjugations with these pronouns. Yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, ustedes, and ellos or ellas. It's not necessary to do the vosotros one, since we're not going to be using it in class. Let's continue. This is for you to practice. So I want you to conjugate the following AR verbs. I want you to follow the conjugation pattern I presented in the previous slide. Once again, remember to keep the stem and only change the ending of the verbs. These are the 5 verbs I want you to conjugate. Bailar, saltar, estudiar, and cantar. To make things easier for you, I'm going to circle the ending of that verb. That's the part that's going to change. Okay? Let me underline the part, or actually let me put it in square, the part that's going to stay the same and will not change. The I should be included there. So everything that you see in the blue box is going to stay the same and it's not going to change at all. So please pause this video, complete the conjugations on your notes. Once you're done completing these conjugations, continue watching the video so we can learn about ER verb endings. Good luck. Perfect. Since you guys are done conjugating AR verbs, now let's talk about ER verb conjugation of regular verbs. Well, regular ER verbs follow a similar conjugation pattern. In both AR and ER verbs, we keep the stems and only change the endings. So let's look at the verb correr. Once again, we have the stem underlined, we have the ending in red, and these are going to be the endings that correspond to the verb correr and those pronouns. Once again, remember that we are not using or we're not conjugating the form of vosotros. So don't worry about that one. Please make sure you copy this correctly, copy those endings correctly. Make sure you keep the stems and do not change the stem correr at all. Now, on the next slide, you're going to practice the conjugations of ER verbs. So make sure you copy those endings the way they are so you can use them as you conjugate the verbs I'm providing to practice. Let's move on. Okay, so let's practice once again. Like I said on the previous slide, we're going to conjugate some verbs. This follow the pattern, so make sure you keep the stem and only change the endings. And I'm going to ask you to conjugate 5 verbs: beber, comer, leer, comprender, and depender. As you can see, all of these verbs are ER verbs. You can see it in the ending. All of these verbs are going to keep the stem. I'm helping you with that. That stem is not going to change at all. We are only changing the endings to the ones you saw on the previous slide. So please take a couple of minutes to conjugate these verbs. And once you're done, click play again so you can move to the next slide. So pause the video now, complete it, and once you're done, click play once again so you can continue. Now, since you're done with AR and ER verb conjugations, let's talk about IR verb conjugations. Same thing. Uh, Practically, ER and IR verbs are going to be exactly the same with one little exception. The nosotros form is going to be a little bit different. Other than that, all verbs will be exactly the same. So let's look at the verb escribir. As you can see, in escribir, now we have an IR ending. Well, just like with correr, those endings are very much the same. See how all of those are the same as before? And those two are also the same as the ones you saw on ER. They're going to be exactly the same. The only one that is different is going to be the nosotros form. As you can see, the nosotros form ending is IMOS instead of EMOS. That's the only difference there is between ER and IR regular verbs. Once again, all the stems are staying there. The stem is not changing, as you can see, not one change and not one change there in the stem. It's always staying the same. So please write this down because on the next slide, I'm going to ask you to conjugate a couple of IR verbs. Let's continue. Just like in the previous verbs, remember to keep the stem and only change the endings. Please follow the endings that I provided in the last slide. Remember, ER and IR verbs are pretty much the same, except the nosotros form. So, these are the verbs I want you to conjugate. Vivir, compartir, and repartir. Once again, all of them IR verbs. Once again, your stem is going to stay the same in all those 3 conjugations. So work on this, push pause for now, and once you're done, move on to the next slide. Perfect. If you're done with the conjugations of AR, ER, and IR verbs, now let's talk about gustar. In Spanish, we use the verb gustar to express likes and dislikes. I'm showing you gustar in a different slide because gustar does not follow the same conjugation pattern as the other verbs in the present tense. It's a little bit different. Here are the conjugations of gustar. As you can see, gustar doesn't really change that much. The conjugation that we follow is gusta for all of them. The thing that really changes with gustar is the pronoun that comes with the conjugation. Me gusta or me gustan. Te gusta or te gustan. Le gusta, le gustan. Nos gusta or nos gustan. Les gusta or les gustan. So why do we have the N in parentheses? That's a really good question. Well, that's because we use that N in a different way. So, well, not really in a different way. We only use it for plural nouns. So let me explain. We are going to be using gusta when what follows the verb is an infinitive or an action. For example, a mí me gusta jugar al tenis, or a nosotros nos gusta comer tacos. As you can see, we have the conjugation of gustar, me gusta, and nos gusta, but what follows immediately is a verb, an infinitive. So that's why we have to use gusta. We also use gusta when the noun that follows is singular. As you can see, once again, we have the conjugation of gusta. A Carlos no le gusta el chocolate. A mis amigos no, a mis amigos les gusta la clase de español. As you can see, the noun that follows gusta immediately is a singular noun. El chocolate, we're talking about one, or la clase de español, we're talking about one class. We only use gustan when what follows it is a plural noun, and that's the only time we use it. Once again, when it's a plural noun that follows it. For example, let's look at those sentences. A María no le gustan los carros. As you can see, we're talking about multiple cars. A María no le gustan los carros rojos. Because this is plural, we need to add the letter N to it. Let's look at the next sentence. A ti no te gustan las novelas de misterio. Once again, we have the conjugation of gustar. We have the N because the noun that follows it is a plural noun, novelas. Okay? So make sure you keep that in mind as you are doing activities next week using gustar. Okay, so this is all the information I have for you on your notes. Remember, if you are done taking notes, remember to one, highlight or underline any important questions or ideas you have or you got from this video, and two, take pictures of your notes and upload those pictures to Google Classroom so you can receive credit for this assignment. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching my video. I will see you in class. Adios.